Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Brian. This is Tech Therapy. Thank you so much for joining me. Today, we have a very special guest. Stop the FOMO. FOMO, what's up, brother?
Man, I am excited to be back home. I'm so tired. Okay.
So,
I
FOMO,
just have to say,
go ahead.
why is it airlines, the chairs no longer lean back? It's like you push the button, it goes back 1 inch. So it starts off leaning forward. And then when you lean back, you're actually leaning upright. And so I can never fall asleep. The minute I fall asleep, I lean forward. And if you have a neck pillow, it pushes you even further forward. So I'm like this the whole time. You're like, ah, it was a fight against gravity. And I'm just so exhausted.
All right.
Okay.
So, for those of you joining us, we're actually talking about the 2023 Value Electronics King of TV Shootout. What FOMO is alluding to is he just got home from New York City. He is back to LA or back from New York. And I want to do this video as a bit of a wrap up conclusion, what we thought of the whole entire shootout,
Mm-hmm.
the results, all the competitors, and some of the controversy, which we'll get to towards the middle or end of the video. So,
Controversy. I love the controversy.
so for those of you who don't know, I'm Brian from Brian's Tech Therapy. This is Stop the FOMO. FOMO was the host. I was the co-host. This year we streamed the entire event. FOMO, what did you think of the event?
Oh, and
Successful?
let's not forget the other voice, the third voice. Caleb was the co-host MC.
Yeah, special shout out to Caleb Dennison, who was the master of ceremony.
Ceremonies.
And then FOMO ran the chat. He was the host. I was the co-host. Awesome event as always. We had very, very impressive TVs. But I guess we'll start right in the beginning. FOMO, what'd you think of the winner, the Sony A95L Master Series?
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, the Sony A95L won. And throughout the entire stream, people come in, who won?
Yeah.
A day later, we're on the 8K now. So who won? Oh, you mean the 8K? No, I meant 4K. Like you mean yesterday? That's
or 5 minutes in, who won? When are you guys going to get to the winners? Not realizing it's a 2-day event. And for those of you who don't know, the first day is exclusively 4K flagships. We had 3 mini LEDs, Hisense U8K, Sharp XLED, the Samsung QN95C, LG G3 MLA WRGB OLED, Samsung S95C QD OLED, and lastly, the Sony A95L Master Series QD OLED, which was the winner. FOMO, were you surprised?
Only a little. Okay, not surprised. I knew the winner would either be the Samsung or the Sony S95C and A5L. I was actually surprised the G3 came as close. And if I looked at the score, I would be surprised. But after they were calibrated, meaning, and Dwayne Davis, excellent calibrator. So the calibrators, Dwayne Davis, Classy, Jason Dustal, and John Riformato. So Dwayne spent so much time on that G3, making all the corrections to get it to where it was, right? So for those of you looking to calibrate any of these TVs, the G3 took a lot of time. It got close to reference, like no TV is perfect on reference. And because of that, it came as close as it did. And for me, the surprise is the G3 coming so close. I expect it to be a lot farther away. I'm not surprised that one of the QD OLEDs won. Now, the surprise for the Sony, for me, is in one scene in particular. I thought the Sony was a little bit less accurate than the Samsung in a pleasant way, but a little bit less accurate. And that was in the movie 1917. It's dark, lying there. He wakes up, and then as the darkness starts to fade and you see the highlights of his coat, you see the edge of his jacket right here. And I'll show you the scene on my video later. On the Sony, this is a touch brighter than reference, than the G3, and more than the S95C. Right there was Sony processing. Now, you cannot turn that off, right? Obviously, try to. That's Sony doing what Sony says. We feel that we can add an extra touch of contrast, enhancement. And we're not talking major. I mean, look, this is pitch black room, reference monitors, all 3 TVs are there. And I was saying to Classy, hey, is it me or is it slightly brighter on the Sony? He says, yeah, it's slightly brighter. So I said, this is the issue right here. I find it pleasant. I like it. Okay, so if this was in a shootout, I'd go, oh, that Sony looks great. Then you have the reference monitor, like, okay, well, it's not exactly accurate.
Yeah.
I mean, it's subtle. And I had to, I mean, I am Mr. HDR highlights, right? So when I see highlights, it catches my eye. The judges, each judge sees something different. And that's what Dwayne Davis taught me is in certain scenes, he's like, you know, FOMO, you keep a look at those highlights. Look at the lower grade colors, like the low lumens. You notice that the Sony is a slightly different color than the G3, slightly different color than the Samsung. And the reference is also slightly different. The question is, which one is closest to the reference? I go, wow, I didn't even see that low level shadow color differences, right? I was looking at the highlights and specular highlights. And then they were saying to me, you know, color graders, they're all looking at different things. We don't know what they're going to look at. And so with the Sony, they didn't notice that specular highlight slightly brighter than I did, because that's my thing, right?
Yeah.
And I was afraid that, okay, well, in that one scene, if that's what Sony did, you know, if they did it in more scenes, or maybe they just like it more and abandon the reference monitor altogether. Now, that's pure speculation.
So maybe in that one shot. Yep.
That one shot, right? But so I knew it would be close because all three TVs, and this is the strength of all three, not super bright, slightly dark, but a little bit of color, and all three looked so similar. And I was saying to myself, man, I'd have a hard time as a judge. It looked to me like all three were so close. And so it wasn't a surprise that QD OLED won. And it wasn't a big surprise that A95L won. I like it personally. I didn't know what the judges would go. So, yeah. I mean, QD OLED. It would be a surprise if WOLED won. How about that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that said, it was obvious no matter what angle you sat from or what criteria you were looking at, the three OLEDs were so close. You were a winner no matter which one of those you bought.
Oh,
And,
absolutely.
you know, I know that last year the G2 had some pretty serious screen uniformity issues. It got dinged for other things. But these three looked amazing, even though the G3 took a while to get there.
You know, Brian, you mentioned uniformity. You want to address the uniformity why the S95C suffered this year?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess we'll get right to it, because that's something that's a bit controversial, because the G2, I think, officially came in second place.
The G3.
G3, I'm sorry, officially came in second place, which was a big upset in regards to, we thought S95C may have been the winner. Now, quick for context, I know it looks like Sony wins every year. This is their 5th year winning. However, LG also won 5 years in a row, with Sharp being the outlier before that with their Pioneer Elite. So it's not favoritism in regards to Sony, regards from Value Electronics, because LG has won for many, many years. But let's talk about what it got dinged on in regards to the Samsung S95C.
So the problem is, if you look at the ballot, it says grayscale uniformity. Uniformity was fine. As a matter of fact, there was nothing wrong with the uniformity. It's grayscale. So I spoke at length with Classy, and it was specifically a pattern. It wasn't a movie. It wasn't a scene where it screwed up. In this one pattern, at I think a 3% or 5%, there was like some very low light gray pattern. On the S95C, it showed a slight blue. It should have been gray. There should be no blue. Yep. Because it showed a slight blue, the G3 did not, the Sony did not, the reference monitor did not, Samsung did. Now, this is a panel lottery. So it wasn't as if all S95C would perform this way. So it's very specific. It was.
Yeah, they're not cherry picked, by the way, for all the users watching. There's no
just pulling it out of Robert's inventory.
Yep.
And this one, it was a specific pattern. It's a grayscale pattern. And it was a panel lottery, basically where there is a grayscale color issue. It happened on that pattern on this TV. And you ding it as you see it, right?
Yep.
Because other TVs that either Classy or Dwayne have calibrated before, they didn't notice it. On this one, they go, oh, just like last year, like you said, the G2, such a diversity of panel lottery. Early in the year, most of the panels are good. Later in the year, you know what? Who knows, right?
The G2 was hurt, and the G2 was hurt last year for that reason.
And this year, the S95C was hurt by, in all other scenes with a uniformity test, not an issue. And that scene in the grayscale, arguably, that could be uniformity. That could be a color issue on
Yeah.
that one scene, but in all the other scenes, the color was fine. So, and Class C, you know, the calibrators, they're going to talk about it. We're going to address all the ballot
Yep.
questions on their own stream. But I had to share that so that it's not uniformity, it's a grayscale pattern, and it's a panel to panel issue. This one, we got a panel that happened to not do that pattern well. Will it affect you if you buy a TV? Absolutely not, because seeing the movies, you saw the movies, they all look the same. But that percentage grayscale, yeah, there's a
Yeah.
slight blue shift. That's it.
And
And it
that's
was
what
obvious enough.
and that's what those patterns are designed to do. They're designed to break things. They're designed to expose things
Mhm.
in regards to processing. I think I was surprised by that too, FOMO, because the one thing we talked about with QD OLEDs is in regards to screen uniformity or banding, it's nearly non-existent. And
Right.
if you do see that banding, it's typically a defective panel or a dead pixel. So I think everyone in the comments scratched their head about that, but that's what we
Mhm.
needed to hear, is that it was a specific
It was
pattern.
specific to grayscale. It's a
Yep.
grayscale pattern that could have been a color inaccuracy, and maybe it was a uniformity thing, but we didn't see it in the uniformity patterns. Only in
Yeah.
the grayscale did it appear. So we're going to call it
Yep.
a color inaccuracy, right?
Yep.
And it's
So
for that it was for that panel. So this is what Classy wanted to emphasize. He felt that it was a panel lottery loss for Samsung.
okay. So, and that, depending on how things are weighed, that really took a very big hit,
Yeah.
obviously, because it didn't perform properly. That adds up in the aggregate, and then it does create the loss.
Mhm.
We did talk about last year spending so much time on dithering and certain shots.
Yeah.
These things do add up when you add them together. But I thought that all three OLEDs looked amazing, especially the QD OLEDs. But the MLA LG G3 was also phenomenal. It didn't
Mhm.
really lag behind in any of the movies or any of the shots. So I would say that I was okay. I was surprised that the G3 came in second place. I thought the A95L just had that next bit of clarity. I did see that in a lot of the shots, and it just seemed better, well rounded. Now, remember, they're all calibrated to the reference. And I was very surprised that the A95L also won kind of the out of the box movie preset. Speaking of that for me a little bit, were you surprised that they won that one as well? I thought that's where Samsung would definitely pull away, or the G3.
So this is what's interesting this year for the Sony upscaling processing with XR Clear. That clear is aptly named. I felt like the clarity on the Sony, even in 4K content, but streaming, it doesn't matter. It
Yeah.
felt that Sony just had sharper. Now, is it because of contrast? They did something. It was very subtle. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, right? It
Yeah.
wasn't
Yeah.
like the UX versus the X95L. There was that very obvious difference in terms of
Yeah.
sharpness and contrast. Here, it was Sony being gentle with its processing, but just enough to push it over the edge where it wasn't inaccurate in some of those scenes. And it was streaming that definitely put it over the top. So once you get to streaming, that's where Sony's like, okay, when we added that additional category this year for preference, I think that definitely made Sony that boom. Up to that point, it was very close, right? I mean,
Yep.
panel lottery aside, just the consistency, all three were neck and neck. And then HDR, maybe a little color volume here and there. Then you get to Apple TV streaming, and it just ran away with it.
Oh,
And that was the difference to me.
and what was so funny, we thought by having that extra category, we'd either give the LEDs more of a shot
Yeah.
or give Samsung or even the G3 with more of a saturated vibrancy.
Yeah.
And that leads us into our next part of the conversation was the LEDs in this shootout really, really struggled. And I know that it was mentioned that two didn't belong, shouldn't have been there, and a lot of the judges had said that. Where I disagree is that they are the flagships of the brands that are sold at Value Electronics, minus the QM8, which isn't sold there, which we wanted to have there.
Well,
Um,
wait, actually, we just realized, Brian, the Hisense flagship is actually the UX. But yeah, at the 65-inch size, it is the U8K. But we
in
saw what
which,
it could do with the UX. Oh, I
which
wish it came out the 65-inch.
Which is also why the X95L was not there, which that would have
Yes.
been very interesting. We spoke to Pablo and Rob Brennan about how the X95L probably would have performed, But the Samsung Q195C, if we're
Yes.
going to go by first, second, and third, obviously is a flagship. That one came in first out of
Yes.
the LEDs. And the Sharp definitely struggled. It seemed like something with the Sharp FOMO. It seemed like its backlight almost wouldn't shut off. It seemed like it was almost pale the entire time. Um,
It's remember the dual cell,
yep,
Hisense's dual cell, and we thought it would just run away with something, and it was an utter disappointment because they relied so much on hardware.
yep,
Where if you have a dual cell, you probably need software to take advantage of the dual cell. You can't
yeah,
just throw it together and assume the best. And I think that's what Sharp did. They assumed 2000 nits will hide all troubles.
hmm,
When in fact, your software has to be top notch. And to see
yeah.
Hisense, so the irony, Hisense had better software, less dimming zones, and Hisense used to have the license to Sharp. Sharp took
Oh,
it
yeah, it's
back,
ironic.
right?
Yeah,
They took it back in 2019, thinking, "Oh,
yeah.
you guys, you're making our name look bad." The irony of it all. But Sharp will get there. They just have to work on their software.
And I think that's something they can change with software updates, obviously, because it seemed like that TV, and that's not the same one that I unboxed at the store, behaved better than the one that was there at the
Yeah,
shootout.
could be a,
So I
like we
think it
said,
could have been a
panel
panel
lottery.
thing because it had a paleness to it that I didn't exhibit the first time I saw it. So I think it needs a software update. And I know that even the calibrators were trying to understand the language of it. And Dwayne Davis and I talked that it shared a lot of the Panasonic's old tools, and he was able to figure it out. But there's certain tools that just aren't there. The Hisense U8K did show up, and the TCL QM8 did not. But I will say that I fully believe that the LEDs should not be competing with the OLEDs anymore in this
Hmm.
sense,
Hmm.
unless we can really open the windows and throw
Well,
sun on them.
it's kind of like that novelty race. You have F1 cars, and then you throw in a jalopy. Let's see what happens, right?
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, at this point, and TCL, they made the right decision. If they showed up, they wouldn't. They definitely wouldn't have won. Now, would they
yeah.
have been embarrassed? I don't know about being embarrassed, but
No,
the Q95C, Phil Holland said it was the most OLED-like, and he was surprised how close it came. But you have to be on angle, right?
yeah.
Go off
And we
angle,
and we had
and
to keep reiterating that, but it was so funny, FOMO, is that we kept them at chest level. The OLEDs were low, but there's no way not to. I'm not saying the judges did this, but there's no way for even when we were looking at it to say like, "Hey, you have to be dead center." When you're walking over and the three have no color shift at all underneath, but the top three look like they're in the wrong. They're like IPS monitors from many many years ago.
uh-huh.
But the fact that LEDs used to have such an edge in brightness and OLEDs were dim, think LCD versus plasma. Even if the plasma was more accurate, some people were still attracted to the brightness. You
Hmm.
cannot do that though when QD OLEDs and MLA just aren't perceptually brighter. They are brighter.
They are bright. So actually, let's just end the argument right here. LCD TVs, movie content are no longer brighter. They can all get to the same level of bright accuracy, and
Yeah.
sometimes QD OLED and MLA G3 got brighter. So the discussion, I want an LCD there. The only reason Robert put them there, though, is because fans want to see it. But here's the reality: why would you want mid-tier performance performing with the best? It's a novelty act that just it makes no sense, right? I know you guys want. Well, I'm into LCD TVs, but it's like you're saying, okay, you have the best TVs. Let's see what second best TVs are like. Like, well, then
Yeah.
why don't you just get a less expensive S90C? No matter, there is no argument that you should have a mid-tier shootout. A shootout is among the best.
Yeah.
Among the mid-tier, it's just get the one that you can afford, because at this point it's all about value, right? And so, let me know what you think about this. Should there be a mid-tier shootout, Brian? I mean, to me, it's pointless.
Well, you and I did that at M Wave, where we had some
Yeah,
of the flagships. We also, and I think there, because we're freestyling, we can give proper context and say, well,
yeah,
hey, this one here, the U7K is, well, we did that actually with the QM8 and
uh-huh.
the U7K versus the A95K. We are able to tell them that you can buy three of these or buy
And
an
there
85
was
inch.
no reference monitor.
And there was no reference monitor. And
It
even though
was,
they,
yeah, all preference, all subjective. That is different. That's not a shootout, right? That's like,
exactly.
what do you like more?
Yes. And the shootout is very controlled, and the judges are all there. filmmakers, they have a certain resume to be there. They belong there as a judge. We don't just pull people off the street. I am not a judge. Fomo's not a judge. Caleb's not a judge. The
But
calibrators are
M-Wave,
judges.
we pull them off the street.
And we did, and actually they're enthusiasts, and they still were
Off the
attracted
street.
to certain things.
So I mean, we have that for you, but
Yeah.
this is not that. It's like you have NASCAR, you have the Demolition Derby, and then you have F1. You know, you don't mix them in a jumble.
Yeah, and it's also we talked about being in the most accurate preset. They are calibrated, but I would argue that the TVs we had at M-Wave, the QM8 and the U7K, performed much better than the U8K, XLED, and the QN95C against these three. Even though we did have a QD OLED and an MLA G3, it just seemed like the tests, because we didn't do tests on patterns, we had demo material and real content.
Mario Brothers?
Yeah, so we had real content. But, you know, there was movie portions of it, and there was really, I think, maybe Phil and a couple other guys said there was only one scene where the QN95C actually beat everything else with just quick specular highlights.
Yes.
But you and I talked also about the Rogue One scene where Vader comes into it was the saber, it was the color of his lightsaber, the explosions were all brighter on the OLEDs, and there was more shadow. And that was one thing, FOMO, to have more shadow detail on the OLEDs, where that was always their weakness. Not bright enough, shadow detail. There's really no way for the LEDs to win.
And so this is why that scene is so great. OLED can render super bright, control black crushing, and give shadow detail. Well, on the LCD TV, it's either one or the other. Specular highlights, you're going to have blacks raised. You make the blacks deeper, the specular highlight's going to shrink. You cannot, counteracting interest, right? On the OLED, you could do both. Super high specular highlights, tiny ones, and then perfect grade of grayscale all the way down to black.
Yep.
LCD TVs cannot do that. Not enough dimming zones. Software cannot overcome physics. That's why that scene was chosen.
Well, and then on top of that, FOMO, it seemed like the overall consensus was that the local dimming of all three mini LEDs was the flaw. Meaning, we know Samsung has this signature of keeping blooming to such a minimum that they may turn the entire screen gray, which we actually saw from almost all three competitors. I don't see the U8K do that much in my home, but the problem with the U8K, when I see it, it's not next to an OLED, so I may not notice it as much. But that's where I thought the X95L may have done better, is that their signature is keep the brightness, keep the shadow detail, don't gray it out. The Z9K exhibited the same problem in the 8K shootout, but that's also an older TV without the new processing.
And the Z9K struggled with 2000 nit content as well, which was crazy. It could not tone map it. You saw it, right? Like,
the X95L, you mean?
Both.
Okay. So
at the end, I told Jason, let's see what it does with 2000 and 10,000. Couldn't do it. It clipped it.
Yeah, well, they always said that they do that just to do it in a way to keep things.
No. Because if you look at the 1000, okay, see, this is the thing. That could be their excuse. It's not the right decision. How about that? Because you have gradation preferred, brightness preferred. That's what it's for. I get it. Why does gradation preferred look just like brightness preferred? I think that's just them. There's no such thing as 2000 nit content or whatever. Because 1000 nit, phenomenal.
It's funny you say that, because with the 80J, brightness preferred and gradation preferred look totally different. On the last couple of years, I'm like, is this doing anything?
And this is why I tell Leo, all the Samsung fans, your Q900C at 2000 nits and above, if you're gaming at 2000 nits and above, destroys the Z9K.
Yeah, you're
going to have perfect gradation, all of that, right?
Yeah.
Z9K is designed, so that's the irony. It gets super bright as long as it's 1000 nits. I'm like, but what? So it will get brighter, but clipped to heck, right? And I tried everything on that. And then, of course, if it's Dolby Vision, well, then it's down 10,000 nits. It'll look like 1000 nits. So, the Z9K is very powerful, but sports, stuff like that, full screen brightness, yes, it has all that. But if you want subtlety, the Z9K actually is really brute forcing it.
So the LEDs,
under 1000
I know they
nits,
have to be
subtle. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the LEDs actually have to be there for this main reason, is that there really isn't enough TVs also released during the year.
Yeah.
to give you you have to have choices. You can't just have the three TVs. Maybe you do 377 inches. It would be a pretty quick shootout. But it just seemed like this year, even more than last year, there was just no comparison at all.
And see, that's so you bring up a good point. Yeah, you could bring in the LCD TVs, but if this keeps happening, you know what the judges are going to do? They just give them all threes because it looks that bad. I mean,
Yeah.
it's you can't judge it when it's not close.
Yeah.
And the Q95C in certain content is a step above. So really, it's like 3 OLEDs, the Q95C, and then the 2 others. Because in certain content, this one just a little bit better. So
now, one thing everybody did agree on is that I think if you turn off all 3 OLEDs, you may feel differently. It's having that elephant in the room or having 3
yeah,
elephants in the room that make it. So if you have one
well,
of these
yeah,
LEDs,
yeah.
we talked about not knowing what you're missing simply because you know what you're looking at. And that's a problem with our comparisons. Isn't really so much the sensor picking up each one. It's the fact that you'd probably be fine with each one of those TVs if you were staring at it by itself.
Agreed. So, can you 1 second? I think I had to plug in my mic or something. It was like something was loose. You're cutting out of my headphones. So I
Are
literally
you
put
okay?
all of this together within 5 minutes of our stream to make sure I
Getting
had
off the
everything.
plane. So, I mean, I think overall it was a great event. We always have some controversy, which will always be the case, and everybody has their favorites. So we addressed the controversy. We addressed the differences between the mini LEDs. They will be there. They have to be there. There won't be enough. There's no makes no sense. People want to know if the
Well,
880L should have been there. Go
Brian,
ahead.
so let's say they have to be there. Would you separate it then? Would you have okay, we're going to turn on the OLEDs. Okay, boom, boom, boom. You said it's fast. Okay, OLEDs are off. Now, LCD TVs are on. I mean, at the end, not like alternating, right? So you're done grading the OLEDs. But see, I don't think it'll work because the reference monitors look just like the OLEDs. You keep the reference monitors on, then you go to the LCD. The judges be like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Right? They
Well,
don't even look close to the reference monitor in terms of
yeah.
contrast.
Well, and the judges are so sophisticated that they know what they're looking at. And I think and a lot of them were LED fans from back in the day. They used them for
The
years.
Z9D, the Z9D.
The Z9D. It's just that the OLEDs are the same size. They're
Mhm.
not that much more expensive if they're expensive at all. They're more colorful. They have real quantum dots happening with them. It's not just the mimicking of them. Perfect contrast, the motion, just they're just on another level now. And that's somebody who loves mini LEDs, but I think at the same size, it's very hard to recommend. And we rarely do FOMO. We rarely recommend a 65-inch mini LED over a 65-inch OLED of any kind.
It's
Now that's almost
only
impossible
if
to do.
pricing is a consideration, right? Only when
Yeah.
they say, oh, my budget's $800.
So where LEDs I think will always live and where they do have a future is above 83 inches, which would be 85 and up. I don't see OLEDs being that large and being affordable.
Uh-uh.
And they look better, as we've said this many times, FOMO. Larger sizes, mini LEDs look better. Even average ones look pretty good when the field of view is bigger than your body.
Well, and that was the wonderful thing about the shootout. Didn't we discover that the field of view is now extending to 50 degrees and it's
Yep.
okay?
Yeah.
You could sit closer, not necessarily get a bigger TV, but you could sit closer or at your seating distance, you can get a bigger TV, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's great.
So we covered that. I know we did a different thing this year than it's been done in the past. We had a lot of ongoing commentary. We talked to the judges. We'll do more of that next year because we planned on doing more conversation with some of the judges you guys didn't have a chance to meet. But we don't want to talk over Caleb, who was there talking. But Caleb was really there to talk to the room. The stream is really separate, and we kind of learned that. We love Caleb, and we much rather have Caleb's analysis and interview Caleb. But he was talking to them. You couldn't see the TVs as well, and that's something we're hoping to remedy next year.
I have a solution for that. So here's my solution. So movies, obviously, we cannot show, but non-movies. So this is how, let's say I'm Caleb. The direction would be, okay, judges, when we show a pattern or a movie or a scene, we want you to sit there and take 3 seconds to take in the scene. Then I'll tell you to come up. It's like a buffet. All right, group one, come on up. Those
Yeah.
3 seconds allows the audience to pause
Yes.
and look at it.
Yep.
And then they get up. It's only, and then to the judges, 3 seconds is nothing. They're like, oh, I'm so impatient. No.
Yep.
Caleb will say, I want to take 3. And, the judges really won't know why, right? But the reality is the MC will tell the judges, every scene, every pattern, sit down again. From that distance, take it in, and then come up. And the reason also is from that distance, they all have good viewing angles, right? Because you're not so if you're close, the viewing angle is really off on many of the LCDs. Sit back, right? You kind of take it in, you take the monitor, you take the scene in, and then you get up close to inspect. But that gives the viewer on YouTube the opportunity to have a clear view. And I will set up the chairs so that when everyone is seated, it's a perfectly clear view for 3 seconds.
Smart. Excellent.
Yep. And that doesn't make it any longer. Just 3 seconds per scene, which is nothing.
Yeah, and you did an amazing job with the stream. I had a blast with it.
I had so much fun.
Let's move on to the next order of business, which was, I know, controversial for many simply because it was 8K, and 8K has kind of fallen a bit by the wayside for many reasons.
Yeah.
And more importantly, simply because the Z9K is a carryover, so is the LG Z2. However, there are 2 4 or 8K streaming broadcast streaming in entities in Japan, which is why the Z9L is there, and so is the Z3. It was a bit of a weird competition because the Z2 won last year against the Z9K and the 900B. This year, I felt they were 75 and 77 instead of 85 and 88. But the Z2 was the winner yet again. And then I felt that the Z9K improved over last year. I think it took a good amount of updates. It's been out for a long time.
It did.
The 900C had a few updates, but the treat for me in the 8K shootout was really being able to spend time with Phil Holland and watching native 8K.
There you go. So people ask, what about the content? We know one guy who's doing content.
Yeah, well, 12K, 16K, 20K.
16K, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's taking this seriously, but he's the creator.
Yeah.
We need more people like him. Yeah,
absolutely. And I wish you guys could have saw that closer, which wouldn't have made a difference even if we were filming in 4K, was the granular difference in the materials, in the metal. And I will say the Z2 looked so much like the reference monitor. I still think the Z series, MLA or not, is the best LED OLEDs out there at their size, obviously. I would love to see a Z2 go against S95C 8K versus 4K. But the Z9K and the 900C both struggled with their local dimming yet again.
Yep. Wait. Okay. I think the LCD TVs, personally, the X90L is where it's at. The software makes more of a difference when you're focusing on fewer dimming zones. For some reason, it just feels to me that the jump in the mid-tier for Sony is so much greater than their jump in the high tier, because in the high tier, you have QD OLED. And so it doesn't surprise me. I mean, Sony's saying, well, we have stuff in the works. Okay. But my speculation is, as far as Sony's concerned, LCD TVs, other than large sizes, but mid-tier X90L, 98-inch, their flagship LCD TVs, I think the Z9K may be the last one, unless it's like 100 inches.
So the Z9K and the 900C both seem to struggle with their local dimming, as I mentioned earlier. But yet, I feel like the 900C, which lagged behind yet again, I feel that Samsung should really be a Samsung. I don't think their filmmaker mode is very strong. I don't care what you do to it calibration-wise. I think every one of their models struggles in filmmaker, which is why I was shocked the Q195C actually looked so good. But it is a QD OLED. But as far as their LEDs, I don't like filmmaker mode, and it takes away all of the strength of what Samsung is. It tries too hard to be accurate. So I wasn't surprised that it lost like the way it did.
And also, the filmmaker there is for those where they say, give us filmmaker mode. Okay, you have it. Stop complaining. The reality is, it didn't look great. It struggled with certain grays. And there was this one, like 1%, 2% black or gray. Yep. And it was doing these freaky patterns. And people were like, what did Phil say? It feels psychedelic. So they were
Yeah.
staring at the screen, right? Trying to get high.
Yeah, but it didn't. What's funny is later on when I took them out of the presets after the judging was over, I took the TVs out of their presets just briefly, and you could see the LEDs again look like LEDs, and
Yes, yes.
The Z2 looked dim. But in its most
Hmm.
accurate preset, the Z2 always looked brighter once they were out of those modes. And even with the Z2 in a standard preset, it didn't look brighter. They looked like how it used to be. And these are premium LEDs. This was after all the judging was tabulated. It was
Hmm.
separate from the shootout. But those watching that have those TVs, it's just not a strength for LEDs to be in a filmmaker preset.
And well, that's exactly what happened again when we did the Hisense UX with the X95L. I put them on their strong mode, right? LCD TVs are known for their brightness, their vibrancy. Man, everyone's yelling, "Oh no, no, put them all in filmmaker mode." I'm like, all
Yeah,
right, but at
yeah.
the end of the day, you do that, you've sucked the value out of both TVs, by the way,
So yeah,
because so I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
so
I
we'll
mean, we
end
did
that.
both, but
We'll end with that. There's one part of the shootout that I clearly wasn't happy with was that, and this always is the way the second day is we do have judges trying to jump on planes. Everyone's trying to get out. The venue has a certain time for us to leave, and everyone has to clean up all your gear. Everyone's got to get ready to go. That even like the year before, it was a Z2 versus the A95K. I put those TVs together. I went and grabbed them because we were supposed to add it and we ran out of time.
yeah,
This year was the same thing. We had the Hisense UX at 85 inches, a TV I thought was phenomenal, go against my favorite mini LED of the year, which was the X95L, my overall favorite. And we threw those together with 20 minutes on the clock. Um, and I really wanted you to see them both. I know you hadn't seen an 85-inch X95L yet and the UX. Now, both of those were calibrated. People are saying in the chat that they were not, but yet we did put them together. What were your thoughts on those two? And then we're going to do a more elaborate one after. But for right now, quickly, at the end of our shootout, I did think we should, instead of having just 8K, we should have an 85 across the board. I think
yeah,
that's where mini LEDs live.
yeah, yeah. No, no, I'm with you. Now, as far as calibration, I think that's still up to dispute. I have to ask Classy.
Yeah.
Robert's convinced they were not calibrated. So
Okay. Jason told me they were, but
see, I mean, and it's possible Jason secretly calibrated. He does that often. He did it to me at
yeah.
M-Wave.
Yeah.
We showed up. Guess what, guys? I calibrated all the TVs for you. I'm like, what?
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. Well, then, so even
That's
whether,
the thing.
well, I
Yeah.
guess it doesn't really matter because simply they weren't scored and the
No.
judges didn't even see them. But I will tell you though, judging on presets, the UX is brighter across the board versus the
Hmm.
X95L until I put it in filmmaker mode and it looked like it was off. Now I know it did have an ambient sensor on, yet it still was its darkest mode. So that's the
It
hard thing
is.
about mixing the Hisense with the other is that they just don't match preset. Theater doesn't match cinema. The standards don't match each other. But were you shocked or surprised on what you saw out of the UX? I know you hadn't seen it yet.
So when they were put in Dolby Vision, they looked very similar. So I
Yes.
guess that's a surprise on one end, but then it
Yep.
not because Dolby Vision did its job.
Yep.
And then when we tuned Filmmaker to what I thought, you know, I know Filmmaker very well in the Hisense. I tuned it to what I thought it should look like, and it looked very similar to the Sony, except consistently the Hisense was slightly warmer. It aired on a touch of red or magenta.
Yep.
The Sony aired on a touch of blue. So neither were right because there are some scenes, Spears and Munsell, we know so well. Where they're orange, I knew was a bit deeper. On the Sony, it felt a bit diluted. And on the Hisense, it fulfilled that depth.
So
And I think that's what Hisense did.
chances are they weren't
Yeah,
calibrated then if
no.
that was the case. Now
Yeah.
talk to me about you were pretty surprised once we got out of filmmaker mode and
Oh,
we were
yeah.
back in HDR10 plus or HDR10.
Okay, so all the modes, Filmmaker, HDR10, standard, it doesn't matter. The UX did the Sony thing. It had a slight XR clear effect. It out XR cleared Sony on its own trick. There was more depth, and everyone said that hyper real, right? I mean, you heard the critics. These people hate that, and yet they're like, okay, all my friends will like it, but what is it? I'm a purist. I want honesty. I'm going with the Sony. I'm like, what the heck? Oh, Give me dishonesty all the time.
Yeah, so I know
The
one of
number
the
one
comments.
selling brand is Samsung, the dishonest one, right?
Yeah,
So that's a compliment, right?
so one of the comments was like, I know this one is this and this one is that.
I
But I'm
want
still
honesty.
and that wasn't a judge, by the way. But it was
No,
funny
he
that
wasn't a judge.
had that been blind, I would have been shocked. For me, I was very surprised how deep the image on the Hisense was. It was
Oh,
very
yes.
rich.
Yes.
And even in the honey drop scene of the Spears and Munsell,
It was brighter.
it was brighter. They both had similar blooming control, except the Hisense was brighter at the honey and controlled the blooming.
As well, if not better. I mean, and of course, 5,000 dimming zones. So,
yeah,
unlike the Sharp, the Hisense has polished its dimming zone software.
Effective, absolutely.
Very effective.
Yeah.
No, but the question for you, $5,000. Now, I know it's going to drop in price, but the Sony X95L right now is above 4,000. This UX likely will drop to just above 4,000 at some point. Which would you choose for the same price, X95L or the Hisense UX? I mean, that is the true question, right?
Well, I mean, for me, they're both no bueno because either one of them are gaming TVs, and I require that. So by default, I'm out of it. As far as movie watching TVs, as long as it's 4K HDR, I would go with the Hisense simply because I loved its impact. I love how bright it is. I love how saturated it is. I love the way. However, Sony's going to pull you back in because we don't watch 4K HDR all the time. A lot of our YouTube TV, which I rely on heavily, unfortunately, the upscaling and that is going to go to Sony. So if I'm honest, the Sony still wins by being better all around. But if we're looking at just 4K content, the UX really, really impressed me.
And unfortunately, we wouldn't get to test the audio. But let's just say the audio, the UX is slightly better. I mean, I don't know if it is, but let's just even throw that in there, right? The streaming upscaling of YouTube TV, low bitrate content, just all the stuff we talk about, cable sources, the Sony, it now becomes a good deal if the Hisense is priced the same. I think the Hisense, this TV is great, but it needs to be a bit less expensive than the Sony at the street. It does do.
Absolutely. All right, FOMO, we're going to end this portion. But overall, I thought it was a great show. I thought wonderful. That, you did a great job. The calibrators did an amazing job. I did a good job.
Yes, you did, my friend. Yes, you did.
We had the calibrators did a great job. Everybody involved in all the meetings. It was a great show. But I think that I wanted to break it down with you after and talk a little bit about the controversy. There'll always be controversy whenever the judges are involved. But thank you so much for being here as always.
Oh, and can I say,
sure,
this wraps up the TV season.
So this
and now, right? CES. So are you ready for next season?
Yeah. So this is our official end of the TV year. FOMO and I do look at the TV year now, and we start with talking about CES as it shows up, and then we have, for us, it's going to be TV's release. Yeah. So it's CES is like the pregame. For speculation, CES, probably M-Wave, right? And then we have the shootout. So we have these segments. I'm sure we'll add more throughout the years.
Yes.
But all TVs have released, and that's why it's so great to have this shootout at the end of the year. Now, I know TCL and Hisense will throw random stuff out in the middle of the year, which is always fun.
Surprise, 100-inch, you 8K.
Yeah, but I thought it was a very good year, and I'm not going to talk on that now because I know we're going to do videos on the different manufacturers and what we think they did well, and also the overall year. But overall, I thought it was a great year. It just my overall analysis of the shootout is the OLEDs are just so far above and beyond the LEDs at this point. It's not close. And the QD OLEDs, I think, will continue to evolve. I really hope that the MLA or LG can come up with something.
I put on the glove. People ask me, where'd your gloves go? Here it is.
Somebody stole them. All right. Momo, thank you so much, brother.
Thank you, my friend.
All right.
See you later.
Talk to you.
Bye-bye.
It's better